Arthur the King is about a dog, but it's also about you and me. Stay tuned to This, That, and Theology to find out how. You're watching This, That, and Theology, helping you see your worldview and the worldview around you, and also how the two of them interact. Arthur the King is still in theaters, but it did come out a few weeks ago, so many of you have already seen this. It follows the life of Michael Lindnord, a Swedish adventure racer. Now, some of the names were changed, and some of the locations were changed as well, partially because this film is largely geared towards American audiences. The story loosely follows the adventures that happened in the 2014 Ecuador Adventure Race Challenge, where teams from all around the world came together and went through the harshest conditions imaginable to try to win the prize of being the top adventure racer, going through jungle, up and down cliffs, across waterways. In many ways, it's the pinnacle of extreme racing. Producer and star Mark Wahlberg saw the story on ESPN, thought it was interesting, and advocated for making a movie. The movie changes the name to Michael Light. A resident of Colorado, Michael is not at all happy with his life. After 19 years of trying and failing to take a world championship, he really feels like his life is just missing. He sees his father, who returned from the war with awards and accolades and medals, and says, I want to have the same thing. And he's willing to sacrifice everything, including his family and his health, in order to chase the high of winning, of being in those extreme situations. However, with his wife's blessing, he does gather a team and a sponsor in order to compete in the 2018 Dominican Republic race. Juxtaposed against this story of the racers is the story of the dog we come to know later as Arthur. He's a surprisingly docile stray dog who has braved the streets of the Dominican Republic even though he has been abused, even though he has injuries. He seems to be caring and sweet, even if he is a little mangy. If you haven't seen the movie yet, there will be some minor plot spoilers ahead, so go ahead and click the link below so that you can skip ahead. On the second day of the 2018 race, the team interacts with the dog when Michael starts giving him meatballs. Those meatballs make the dog start following them. In fact, in real life, just like the movie, the dog doesn't stay very far away from this team who showed him some kindness by giving him some food. Along the way, the dog endears himself to the other team members, at one point even saving their lives by keeping them from going over a cliff. Ultimately, the dog becomes a member of the team, even to the point where they sacrifice winning the race in order to rescue the dog from being drowned. Even so, the team, who was so focused on winning, whether it was for their marketability, whether it's for their feeling of accomplishment, or to make their father happy, they sacrifice all of that in order to bring Arthur across the finish line. The last bit of the movie involves trying to get Arthur back to the United States, where he can receive the treatment that might just save his life. At the end of the film, we see how the real Arthur ended up living with his new family, and we see a resolution of every one of those plot issues, particularly with Michael and finding value in the life that he has. Here at This, That, and Theology, we try to give you a review that answers two questions. First of all, is this film worth seeing just as a movie? Is it a quality film? The second question is whether it's worth seeing because of the worldview issues that either may be brought up that you agree with or that become good conversation points with you and your family. It's pretty clear that the filmmakers really knew how to tug on the heartstrings of their viewers, making you care for the dog and even Michael quite a bit by the time you get to the last scene. It's also set in some beautiful locations, moments I wish I could just stop the movie for a moment and take in the beauty of the jungle in the Dominican Republic. And while the chemistry between the actors is sometimes forced, there's a clear chemistry between the dog and the actors, particularly between Mark Wahlberg and the dog. This is all negatively impacted by the fact that there is language, although most of it is mild, all the way through the film. There's a lot in this film that would be good for younger viewers to see, both in the care for the dog and the encouragement to value family over all the other things that kind of distract us. And having the constant level of mild swearing and one F word just felt like it was unnecessary additions to a film that just didn't need it. This felt like a really big missed opportunity because there is a lot of good, positive messages that are found in this film that would have been great for younger audiences to see and to hear and experience. In a culture that is increasingly sedentary, there's even a desire for us to be able to get up and get out and experience all that the world has to offer, particularly when you see such beautiful sights. Not only that, but one of the greatest messages that our young people need to hear today is the value of family. how that really is the greatest thing that we can achieve, is living a life that glorifies our family, that sees them grow. And that message ends up coming loud and clear. Unfortunately, many of the young people who need to hear that at a young age aren't going to hear it because of the language. There is a certain degree where the film feels a little disjointed as well, because you have two stories that are kind of interacting through this race. You have the story of Michael and his relationship with his wife, his children, those around him, and with himself, really not feeling like he has a whole lot of value because he hasn't won this race. He's willing to sacrifice everything to endure the suffering in order to achieve it. The other story is about a dog who's had a hard life, who has endured quite a lot of suffering, and finds home and comfort through Michael. There are times when this interaction actually feels forced, and we know that this is based on a real story, but the storytelling about suffering and how pushing through suffering is as this great goal in life feels a little forced as we go through the film. That being said, it's still an enjoyable film, if not maybe Oscar-worthy. For the second question, we're asking about worldview and what kind of worldviews are being communicated and what we can take away from it. How does it interact with a biblical worldview? As we mentioned earlier, Mark Wahlberg seems to want this movie to be about suffering, about the value of pushing through suffering, both in the suffering that Arthur has to endure and the suffering that Mark Wahlberg's character does as well. But while that may be the intended message of this film, I don't think that's the message that gets communicated. It's pretty clear from the very first scene, that's almost a prequel to the rest of the movie, that Michael has a problem with seeing success and pushing past suffering and endurance that ignores everything else around him, ignores the people around him, even ignores his family. That pride and stubbornness leads to his loss in the beginning of the film, and his ability to move past it to care for others more is what ultimately leads to their success in the latter half of the film. The storytellers in this film use the entrance of Arthur to serve as a catalyst, to make all of them care for not just themselves, but starting with the dog, they care for Arthur, and then they start caring for one another. By the time we get to the end of the film, each person realizes it's not about them, it's about the team, and Arthur is one of them. The second worldview thing we want to talk about here actually has to do with dogs and animals in general. There's something about films that have animals in them that we just tend to like more. There's a reason why this is called a feel-good film. It has a lot to do with the character of Arthur. There is something ingrained in us that makes us want to care for animals. At the very end of the film, they talk about the Arthur Foundation. They care for animals in places where maybe they wouldn't normally get care. We identify with the desire to care for Arthur even as he's hungry and starving and hurt. This isn't a coincidence. The very first thing that God ever told us to do was to care for creation, naming them, caring for them, having dominion over them. We were entrusted with creation, and that includes our four-legged friends. I know for me personally, my life is enriched by my two dogs, Nana and Pippin, who are both rescues, as is our cat, Strider. There is something ingrained to our very fiber that knows that we need to care for the creation around us, whether that's our pets or just taking care of the world we live in. Both of these two topics make for excellent conversations as you watch Arthur the King with your family. Again, there are some concerns about language and some peril that's displayed, as well as some somewhat graphic depictions of wounds that are on Arthur. Obviously, it's just makeup, but it does bother you a little bit when you watch this animal who looks very much in pain. I enjoyed Arthur, looking forward to watching it again with my family once it comes out on streaming, and I hope you enjoy it as well, as long as you're able to kind of tone out some of the language or use a filter. As we talked about recently on an episode of This, That, and Theology Live, which streams every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, movies that are based on real events just connect with us in a different way. If you're interested on the true story of Arthur and Michael, you can find out the comparison between the film and the book and true story on Hollywood versus history. And I'll put a link to that article in the description below. Hopefully this review has been helpful. Thank you for tuning into This, That, and Theology. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when we go live or drop a video just like this one. Thanks, and see you next time.
I've never seen anything like this.
Everybody knows about it. Guess what? I'm not a dog person.